Namaste everyone. I welcome you to the webinar of Inclusion of Yoga in Medical Curriculum hosted by American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. This conference is a virtual month-long celebration to mark International Yoga Day, where we bring you webinars, yoga sessions, spiritual discourses, and workshops spread over 4 weekends. Each of these sessions are led by prominent researchers, doctors, and experts in the respective field. For our new viewers who are joining us for the first time, I take this opportunity to introduce you to the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. The American Academy of Yoga and Meditation, also known as AAYM, is a non-profit organization for physicians, researchers, medical professionals, and practitioners of yoga and meditation. This organization is dedicated to education and research in the field of yoga, meditation by fostering interdisciplinary approach that links science, ethics, spirituality, and arts to improve ways of human life. The world has witnessed a shift in the epidemiology of diseases towards lifestyle-related ailments or non-communicable diseases called as NCDs. The financial burden of NCDs like cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, hypertension is increasing on health systems rapidly. Yoga is gaining prominence in improving mental health and the quality of life in treatment of these NCDs, psychiatric diseases, and psychosomatic disorders. With the backing of scientific research, yoga has played a powerful role as a complementary therapy in cancer management. In the light of pandemic, yoga has emerged as a powerful tool for managing frontline worker burnout. There is a need for medical students to be aware of the philosophy and science behind yoga for the betterment of their own health as well as that of their patients. This brings us to a thought: what if yoga was made a part of the medical curriculum in nursing and medical courses? However, there are many challenges like consensus on uniform curriculum, lack of comprehensive research studies for establishing disease-based models, and also regulatory framework that is needed to make this happen. With this, I bring an interesting and most needed discussion with this webinar, Inclusion of Yoga in Medical Curriculum. Join us as our eminent speakers in this field discuss this important topic, present their views, and answer your questions at the end of the session. It is now my honor to invite you, the moderator of today's webinar, Dr. Nirmal Gupta. Dr. Nirmal Gupta is a professor and head of cardiovascular thoracic surgery for 20 years at Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences in Lucknow, UP. After his qualification as heart surgeon from Delhi, he worked at various prestigious medical universities at Leeds, Brigham, and London for nearly a decade before returning to India in 2000. He's the honorary fellow of Association of Cardiothoracic Association of India and member of International Cardiothoracic Surgery Network. He has survived 3 years as an honorary secretary of Telemedicine Society of India from 2015 to 2018, a life member of Society of Nuclear Magnetic Resonance and the Organ Transplantation Society of India. He is founding president of Arogya Bharati at Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute and is a funding chairman of Bless a Heart Mission, a social action group now adopted by the government of Uttar Pradesh called Golden Hour First Responder Project. He has authored several books on cardiovascular surgeries and heart disease management and is currently authoring a book, The Science of Pranayama. With several dozen scholarly publications in recognized and academic journals, he is also editor of WebMD and reviewer of several national and international cardiology and cardiotoxic surgery journals. Welcome, Dr. Gupta. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shruti ji. Namaste to all. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone, depending on the time zones that they may be joining us from. I am honored and privileged and would like to convey my most humble gratitude for the opportunity to be the moderator of this very important session, which has a galaxy of eminent medical teachers and physicians from both ends of the globe. I would like to remind everyone that this duration of the whole program would be 75 minutes. So we have to be aware of that fact when we are talking to each other and alone as well. I hope we all agree with one fact, that basic structure of medical education has hardly changed over the past 100 years. Yet, along with the medical education, doctors in the 21st century are compelled to navigate through a dizzying array of modern technologies, new regulations, and ever-increasing patient and societal expectations. This has been seen in the current pandemic by all of us. Forced with this scenario, despite all the inertia, medical education is in an era of transformation, and medical schools throughout the world are now beginning to innovate and prepare new physicians for the emerging new model of learning, care, and epidemics and pandemics. Medical students of today are the physicians of tomorrow. None can agree more than a good physician has a duty to be physically and mentally healthy to lead not only the patients, their families, to a good outcome and a good quality of life, but also for himself in their work environment where they spend a good number of years, starting as an adolescent student until they mature as an adult specialist or a super specialist. I'm confident that all the honorable panelists would share and agree with my personal experience of the initial shock and stresses of the changed environment of medical schooling and routine assessments like I did. Then by the time we graduated, a new kind of stress begins to affect us, which are the erratic routines of medical duties, responsibilities towards the patient life and their relatives' expectations. Over and above, the ongoing studies and examinations for obtaining a degree or facing competitions for the advancement of our careers. I know for countries in Europe and North America do have specialized centers for helping and counseling students suffering with stresses and depression. However, I do not know if there is any such regular facility that exists in the medical school of developing or undeveloped countries, including India. There could be few exceptions. This could be rather an important factor for higher rates of depression, interpersonal conflicts, marital problems, high number of suicides amongst the medical students, residents, and even practicing doctors across the world. There was one paper I was reading from Brazil where the suicide rates are 4 times more in the medical practitioners than the normal population. During the ongoing pandemic, many researchers have confirmed the findings of modern scientific studies that have earlier confirmed the effectiveness of yoga, including meditation, in mitigating the adverse effects of stresses faced by their students, residents, and doctors alike. Vast majority of these researches were done in the past 3-4 decades only, using extremely precise modern technologies and methods that include EEG, functional MRI, and even long-term longitudinal outcomes in malignancies, NCDs, and psychosocial disorders. Although mostly done in the Western countries, a good number of these researches have been done in a few very well-established yoga research centers and universities in India. Before I invite the honorable panelists to give their opening statements, I would briefly introduce them to our viewers. Our first panelist is Honorable Padma Bhushan awardee, Professor K. Srinath Reddy. Professor Reddy is the founding president of the Public Health Foundation of India. Earlier, he headed the Department of Cardiology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences at New Delhi, where I had a brief stint during 96-97 myself. I did not have the fortune of meeting him then, but today, for the first time in my life, I am seeing him live and I am going to speak with him live. He was appointed the first Bernard Lown Visiting Professor of Cardiovascular Health at the Harvard School of Public Health in 2009 and presently serves as the Adjunct Professor of Epidemiology at Harvard. He is also an Adjunct Professor of Emory and Sydney University. He is the first Indian to be elected to the National Academy of Medicine in USA and was awarded prestigious international and national doctorates and fellowships. He was the president of the World Heart Federation in 2013-15. Professor Reddy also serves on the several boards as advisor on health to the states governments of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, apart from being the second highest award of Padma Bhushan. Our next panelist is Honorable Professor M.C. Mishra ji. who has served All India Institute of the Medical Sciences for 37 years in various positions, starting from senior residency to faculty, professor of surgery, and finally ending up as director and the chief of the globally well-known JPN Apex Trauma Center. Professor Mishra was awarded a Commonwealth Fellowship in 1988, and I followed him very soon in 1989, reaching to UK. I was talking to him yesterday that we could not cross our paths then, neither at All India Institute nor in UK. However, his training in trauma and care services at the Hope Hospital, University of Manchester, very close to Leeds, where I was doing my training. He returned to AIMS in October 89 with lots of new ideas, energy, and enthusiasm. He realized that the trauma is going to be a major public health issue in the future India, which is the present India that we see today. Thereafter, Professor Mishra established the very well-known JPN Apex Trauma Center, as I mentioned earlier. He was awarded V.C. Roy National Award of the MCI in 1996 for developing the specialty of minimally invasive surgery in the country, Fellowship of the National Academy of Medical Sciences, New Delhi in 2005, Honorary Fellowship of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow in 2012. He has also received his honorary doctorate from the Amity University. Our third honorable panelist is no other than our own American Academy's chairman, Dr. Indranil Basu Ray, who is a staff cardiologist and cardiac electrophysiologist and the director of cardiovascular research at the Memphis Veteran Administration Medical Center at Memphis, where he additionally holds an adjunct professorship. He is also a faculty in guiding innovative research at the Mass General Institute of Technology and Link Q program. He has been meditating since a very early age of 6 and practicing, teaching, and researching meditation over the last 3 decades. His research centers on the use of yoga and meditation in modern medicine, particularly in heart diseases. He is one of the 10 chosen cardiologists by the American Heart Association to draft the scientific statement on the use of meditation in the treatment of cardiovascular illnesses. He has authored several hundred peer-reviewed articles and edited world's first multi-author reference book called The Principle and Practice of Yoga in Cardiovascular Diseases. Our fourth and the last panelist is a very young, dynamic Dr. Darshan Mehta. He is the assistant professor in medicine at the Harvard Medical School. He is the Director of Education at Osher Center at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Medical Director of Benson Henry Institute of Mind, Body, Medicine and Wellbeing. He is the Director of the Center for Faculty Development at Mass General. In addition, he is the Site Director for the Practice of Medicine and Wellbeing curriculum required for the first-year students at the Harvard Medical School. His education and research interests include curricular development in complementary and integrative medical therapies, mind-body educational intervention, in training of health professionals and promotion of professionalism in medical trainees. Now, before we open this important subject for discussion amongst the panelists, I would like to invite my honored guests, panelists, to briefly give their mind on the status and the need of inclusion of yoga, including meditation, in the medical curriculum in their respective areas where they live and work in, say, 5 to 6 minutes. And then we will open the discussion, and we will take questions from each other and from the public at large through the chat box. Thank you very much. Dr. Srinath Reddy ji, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Gupta, for this invitation to be part of this very distinguished panel on a subject of great importance for the health systems of India and for global health. Basically, we very clearly recognize that yoga is a composite package of asanas, which are the most well recognized as being synonymous with yoga, but we also must recognize that it extends to meditation and spirituality. It also extends to a diet which is healthy, and that diet also leads to a broader environmental consciousness where you recognize that the human body is part of a much larger natural assembly of multiple life forms which are interlinked and interdependent. Therefore, yoga goes far beyond the physical asanas which are frequently seen in the media images. It is indeed a very important element of physical fitness promotion, but there are many other elements of yoga that do add to human health and also to planetary health. If we are really looking at yoga as a part of medical education and try and rationalize why it is needed for medical students, let us start off with the immediate individual benefits for the students themselves. It will clearly enable students to have good physical and mental health and to develop emotional stability and the composure to combat stress, recognizing that stress is going to be a fairly constant feature in the kind of work that they will have to do in future life as healthcare providers, but that they must develop the kind of strength and stamina for emotional stability and protect themselves from the adverse effects of stress. We also recognize that they must learn as care providers in training and later on as future care providers to use yoga in the management of multiple disorders as either a principal pathway of alleviation of the medical problems and suffering, or as a complementary therapeutic modality which can accompany the various allopathic interventions for which they are being specifically trained during the medical curriculum. So that will make them much more complete physicians when they start their practice. They must also recognize that it can be a very important part of rehabilitation, particularly in the area of cardiac rehabilitation. My own colleagues at the Public Health Foundation of India, in partnership with multiple cardiology departments across the country, including the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, have done a very large trial, which has been published and has been very well received also in international scientific conferences, where it's clearly shown that compared to standard management, yoga as a part of cardiac rehabilitation greatly enhances the exercise performance as well as reduces the need for rehospitalization. So it's an important contribution to cardiac rehabilitation that we have seen. But it's not just in the area of non-communicable diseases that we must really see yoga as being beneficial, whether for hypertension or for diabetes or for obesity, all of which are, of course, very important threats in in a public health scenario which is under great transition towards non-communicable diseases. Even when we look at an infectious problem, challenge like COVID, we must recognize that whether it is innate immunity or adaptive immunity to the infection or to even the response to immunization depends a great deal on physical fitness as well as on the nature of diet that one consumes. Unless both are adequately balanced, we find that the innate immunity, which is the first defense against an infection, is weak. And even in terms of combating an infection when it comes in, we do have a crumbling defense if we do not have the strength to vigorously combat the infectious agent. But even for success of vaccination, though we do talk in general terms from clinical trials of 60% efficacy or 90% efficacy, we realize that individual response to vaccines differs a lot on a number of characteristics, whether it is age or associated health conditions, or particularly the nutritional status. So a good nutrition and physical fitness, despite an advanced age, can still be capable of producing a very good immune response to a vaccine. So there are very many ways in which we can actually bring yoga to demonstrate its relevance to a medical student, whether it's non-communicable or communicable diseases, and certainly in the area of mental health, it has a great role to play. And I believe it is also absolutely important for transforming the construct of medical education and health, because far too long, health, in terms of its educational construct, has been extraordinarily reductionist, because we've always looked at organs, tissues, and cells. And the more we go into the micromolecular level, we feel we have achieved the greatest of scientific advances in understanding disease and in finding solutions. Unfortunately, we forget the interdependence not only of the various bodily organs and systems, but of the relationship to multiple other external agents, including the environmental factors. Whether it is the microbiome of the multiple trillions of bacteria that reside within our gut and elsewhere in the body, which determine the status of our nutrition, the status of our immunity, our ability to combat diseases, whether they are communicable diseases or non-communicable diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. We are dissociating that whole construct of the internal cosmos that exists within us of the microbiome. At the same time, we are also forgetting that the epigenetic factors, the multiple environmental and behavioral factors, whether it is air pollution or whether it is the smoking or whether it is the nature of the diets we take, all of these actually also have epigenetic influences on the gene expression. So even though we are very fascinated by the genetic structure and its influences, we forget that many of the genetic influences can be greatly modified in terms of their expression by way of upregulation or downregulation by a variety of environmental exposures and behaviors. And unless we understand this connection, we will again tread a very reductionist path and find incomplete solutions. So in order to really transform the mindset of our medical students in understanding this whole connection, is absolutely important that we bring yoga into the picture, because yoga offers that holistic construct. And that is where we must actually pin some of the foundations of even our modern science as we advance. And I believe, in conclusion, that the spectrum of science is reductionist in content, but holistic in context. Just as the colors of the rainbow are individually fascinating when we see them as red, yellow, or blue, but nevertheless, the brightest white light which illuminates our vision and shows us with clarity the truth is actually a complete amalgam of all those spectral colors into the bright white light. And therefore, it is the holistic construct that we must impart to our students, even as they proceed, and even whether they become care providers or whether they become researchers or both. It is important for them to recognize that whether the individual patient that they're looking after or a research problem that they are trying to tackle, they have to retain both the strength of a reductionist investigation to try and find out the specific areas of pathology, but link it much more holistically to the overall environmental and other contextual factors. And therefore, yoga actually not only helps to provide them the physical fitness and the mental clarity, but it also gives them a vision of understanding health in its broadest dimensions. And that is why I believe yoga must become a part and parcel of medical education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Reddy. I think you have beautifully summed up your very brief but very, very precise and to the point mind on the issue of yoga, including meditation, not only as a body of giving us good health, but also as a wholesome remedy for the medical students of the future. By bringing up the issue of reductionism, I remember the 16th century French philosopher Descartes, who was the person who proposed the theory of reductionism. And that is where the modern science started to become more, as you said, reductionist in its approach. However, now we are realizing that it is not the case. Thank you very much. We will discuss your points that you have raised later in the discussion. I now invite Professor M.C. Mishra ji to give up his mind on the subject. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Nirmal Gupta. And thank you, Dr. Indranil, for bringing up this whole concept for inclusion of yoga and meditation in the medical curriculum or undergraduate curriculum, as we say. The very first outset, may I also request you, not only that we are discussing today for inclusion of yoga and meditation into medical curriculum, but I would take it that through American Association of Yoga and Meditation and the discussion which we are having today, we also recommend on the basis of the discussions which we will have, and we know the benefits of the yoga and meditation, which are enormous. To have yoga, at least yoga, if not meditation, to be part of the physical training what we receive in primary and secondary education, and then these students transition into medical schools, engineering schools, business schools, and so on and so forth, so that it becomes integral part of each citizen of the world to experience the wellness and lead a healthy life, which we are struggling to cope with. Because before the COVID pandemic hit us so badly, we were all the time discussing about the epidemic of non-communicable diseases. These were diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease. And if you look at the top 3 diseases, or according to WHO, which are responsible for years of productive life lost, cardiovascular diseases obviously account for on the top. And next comes the mental health illnesses. And on third position now comes the injuries. And then naturally there's cancer, respiratory diseases, and all other diseases. HIV is likely to go down in the list. This is infectious disease, but it is likely to go down. It has gone down already. So if you look at the years of productive life lost, top 2, if you take cardiovascular diseases and mental health illnesses, both can be very well tackled by a healthy living to a large extent. Cancer as well. When we talk of yoga and meditation, it is to keep the human body, human health healthy as it is, not allow it to develop diseases. Of course, not all diseases can be prevented. Not all diseases will not be there, will be there, but I think if we practice healthy living, then probability of each one of us getting these illnesses will go down significantly. So if we include the yoga and meditation in some form in primary and secondary education, transition it into professional education of any kind. It may be at workplace of corporates, it may be workplace of the factories, industries. It may be as a social momentum or movement about this, because every aspect of life actually begins from psychosocial effects, and which can be very well tackled by yoga and meditation. Having the positive attitude, develop confidence, not let negative thoughts overwhelm in our minds. I think that is something which is extremely important. So what we call psychoneuroimmunological effects in the body. Our thoughts and emotions do affect our immune system. Everybody is not so calm and cool. People do have stress. Although I always say, if you love your work, if you enjoy your work, there is no room or scope for stress at work. But it doesn't happen in real life. People do have stress at work. They are anxious. They develop various kinds of fears, negative emotions, and they all are known to weaken our immune system as well. And we all know whether any infection overwhelming the human body or even cancer is somewhere related to our immune system. Yoga, including meditation, mindfulness, positive attitudes and emotions, relaxation at the correct time will strengthen our immune system. There is no doubt about that. So what we need to do through pranayam or yogic asanas, we unlock ourselves, our own healing potential. And that is something we have very well articulated. Our yogis, our rishis who described and practiced yoga in their lives, that what we call achar, that is physical activity and exercise, physical well-being. Then it is the vichar, the right thoughts and attitude towards life, which is absolutely vital for our well-being. And then naturally the diet, the ahar, which is so important. What we are seeing today, the epidemic of obesity, this is problem of plenty at times, unhealthy living. So healthy, nourishing diet, the role of healthy, nourishing diet cannot be overemphasized. Along with adequate intake of fluids, fresh foods, the greens, sprouts, unrefined cereals, fresh fruits, what we call sattvic bhojan, and which is, if prepared and served with love and affection, can go a long way in impacting our healthy living. And then comes our vihar. That is something, proper recreational activities to relax our body, and that is where yoga can also play a lot of role. Meditation can play a lot of role, and many other types of activities through various other systems which are available to us, and that will allow us to lead a holistic health. And then naturally comes our vyavahar, that is healthy interpersonal relationships, which enhances our psychosocial health. Its role cannot be overemphasized. And that is where, if we begin this healthy living concept from very early in our age, with physical training, because every school has a physical training opportunity for the students. And if the yoga can be assimilated in daily routine, it will go a long way when these students transition into medical schools, engineering schools, business schools, and so on and so forth. And that is where, when they are already primed about the benefits of yoga, They are unlikely to go obese when they are already in teens. And also, when they enter a medical school, they are already primed about the benefits of yoga, and then they can be further groomed that and exposed to the positive aspects of yoga in various disease processes. If people, as I said, not 100% people will do it, not nor they will become healthy, and there will be some problems. Very large number of diseases which I have enumerated. Cardiovascular disease, major killer. Number one in terms of disability adjusted life year lost, as per WHO in 99, continues to stay on top. Mental health illnesses, even in India, as Dr. Nirmal Gupta mentioned, the suicide rates amongst the medical students or in any society in general, for our farmers, for example, so many suicides are taking place all around India. It is why? Because somewhere they have lost control on their mind and they think the world is finishing and they can't cope with it, and they commit suicide. Whether it's a student, whether it's a farmer, whether it's some business corporate person, as we have seen, that they cannot cope that stress. And that is where the role of yoga and meditation come very handy. If they can get a counsel at that time of a person, I think we can save these precious lives. So that is where the incorporation of yoga as an integral part of medical curriculum to expose these students, they already have seen the benefit of it. Now it has to be reinforced. They can continue to practice themselves, they remain healthy, and also then they can prescribe to their patients, as we do in many ways. It's starting, as I said, to topmost illnesses which are responsible for disability adjusted life year loss. And besides that, like trauma is the third, number 3 now in 2020-25. So it happens, and we all have seen post-traumatic stress disorder, what we are witnessing in COVID also. And what we discussed, I think a week ago, the post-COVID sequelae, the role of yoga in post-COVID sequelae, all kinds of sequelae which people are having during this pandemic can be very well handled with practice of yoga and meditation. The large number of people who have succumbed to COVID, if they were told to have lived the healthy living and developed their respiratory reserve, this pneumonia would not have killed them. What they suffered and they died of. And having positive attitude. This is what I have seen very closely in a lot of people. They just get depressed. They just refuse to do what they are supposed to do to keep their body healthy. And that is where the medical students, if they are primed during their undergraduate days, years, now what we have to see how we can incorporate this capsule in medical curriculum, whether it in terms of, like we were discussing last week, and what Darshan would tell us, what is the practice and how much it is incorporated into undergraduate medical education, and which form. Of course, the students have to take elective. They can opt for elective posting, either for yoga or for Chinese system or for any other system of this kind. Opt an elective. That is something is there. What in India we need to see how we can incorporate into this into our how many hours in the first year, how many hours in the second year, third year, fourth year, and do we have some kind of an end assessment at the time of exit examination? How much it should be part of that assessment, whether it should be a formative, whether it should be a summative assessment. I think we need to develop that kind of a precision when we are giving our recommendation, and also like communication skills. We have been discussing at length for last at least decade that communication skills must become part of undergraduate medical curriculum, the postgraduate training. The same way, the role of yoga, and I'm sure it applies to all disciplines of medicine, uh, starting from head to toe. There is no discipline, specialty in medicine, and that is where the approach, integrative approach, has to be there, that we prescribe it like a prescription to people and ensure that they get help and assistance to perform, like we do music therapy, like we do other things also to keep encourage people for their well-being and to come out of depression through their illnesses. If we use yoga, it can impact not only the mind, the brain, the lungs, the cardiac fitness, the kidneys, the liver. If they have a healthy diet from the very beginning, then a lot of liver disorders actually can be prevented. Kidney diseases can be prevented. It's a kind of a preventive health, which is so much important for our holistic health. When if we look at the definition of the holistic health, it's the physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. And yoga will bring the spiritual well-being, the mental well-being, and that is where the role of yoga has not been fully, I should say, exploited in at global level, in our own country where it originated. I think our Prime Minister did a great job by including yoga as International Yoga Day on 21st of June in 2015 was the first one, and the world is realizing that this is the approach to holistic health. Rather than depending on medicines, we must depend on healthy living. And that is something, if our medical students are told from the very beginning, they'll themselves practice. And once we practice something, we can preach very easily. It's very difficult to preach something when we are not practicing ourselves. I think that is where the proof of pudding lies. And that is what we need to do. So thank you very much, Dr. Nirmal, and please take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mishra. You have very beautifully summed up and identified a very important point that the yoga, including meditation, should be practiced not only in the medical curriculum, but also right from the beginning in the childhood. And then when these kids, they graduate over to their secondary education and then for professional education, they become a very good human being and peaceful in mind. And I'm sure that that will go a long way in creating peace and harmony, not only in the society at large, but across the world, as today we are facing the issues of international conflicts in many, many different areas. We can go on and on, but thank you for bringing up this issue, and also an important point of psychosocial issues and trauma, how meditation and yoga can help in alleviating the post-traumatic stresses. I would now invite, I think Dr. Basure is our family member, so I'll keep him for the last, as he's seen in the pictures also. I will invite the guest, Dr. Darshan Mehta, a young, dynamic medical doctor from Harvard, to give his views on the subject that he has been listening to and he has been assigned to. Thank you, Darshan. Go ahead.
Thank you to everyone, and it's really an honor to be with amongst such esteemed colleagues and professors. I just wanted to add, I will keep my comments brief because I want to make sure that we have time for some discussion, and I can already see there were some comments raised as to how things may be different for students who are studying in India versus students who are studying in other parts in the world. And that is, I think, important to recognize. I think the one thing I want to add, in addition to already that is mentioned here, is there, obviously we're thinking about yoga and meditation in the context of well-being, and we think of well-being in the, how do we cultivate well-being? It is not just about feeling well. This is actually a skillful practice that takes time, just as we think of anything else. So somebody, for example, does not become a marathon runner overnight. It's a skillful practice. You have to build endurance, you have to build stamina, and over time you go. So there's, I think second, we think of how do we think about yoga in terms of also how we address clinical care, right? And that's been brought up. And I think there are a lot of, again, prior to speakers already illuminated on the different dimensions of clinical care, where there might be effects on clinical care, and how it can be used to help be, in the role for prevention, treatment of illness, and particularly obviously non-communicable disease. The third piece that I just want to highlight, and I think it was mentioned in the comments, but I do think it's important to underscore a bit more, is thinking in what I would think about is sort of two parts to it. One is communication skills. So how does the practice of yoga and meditation facilitate our ability to communicate with others? And I actually think of it in our current context, in the world we're living in today, in the framing of communication, is does it allow us to be aware of our own biases? We carry, as was well known, and particularly this early work was done in cardiovascular disease, where you look at, if you have two individuals who present with the same clinical symptoms and signs and lab values and such, how does that actually, do we treat them differently? And the answer is we know quite well, yes. We know that we would, as a clinical professional, even though we like to believe that we are without bias, we will treat a Black individual differently than we will treat a white individual. We will make different clinical decisions. And those relate to our unconscious biases. And so I think one of the things that I am particularly interested in is that how do these wisdom traditions facilitate in breaking down some of these biases that we carry and we learn. Those are learned behaviors that come from our education, our community, our parents, all of that factors into how we think about unconscious bias. So that is one area of, I think, opportunity where these approaches can help. Second is, I think, of critical thinking. That does the practice of yoga and meditation influence the way in which we think about clinical, how we make decisions, diagnostic and therapeutic decisions in general, overall? Do we have better critical thinking skills? So historically, medicine has been celebrated, people who enter medicine, by virtue of what we would think of, people who enter medicine are entering it because of their ability to memorize. And it turns out that's not a very important skill overall for the practice of medicine. It may get you there to enter the field, but it certainly doesn't help someone become a better physician overall. And so it's really about our ability to think. How do we actually process, analyze, and digest that information? And that's sort of analogous to how we think about yoga, is how we process the world around us, analyze, digest, as has already been mentioned, and then output. I will just illustrate that I think these critical thinking skills is really where medicine is going to need to evolve into. And I think this is where there are opportunities where the practice of yoga allows us to better think about our own selves. And I'll, happy to discuss more in our discussion as to practical ways we can involve this. So I will pause there, and then we'll have a continued discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Darshan. I think you have brought up a very important issue of clinical as well as racial bias in the society. I think we all agree that good kids produce good parents, and good parents produce good kids. So the problem is it is a vicious circle. Somewhere we have lost the good parenting. And why we lost good parenting across the board in almost all nations is because we have cut off ourselves from the roots, and roots is the natural way of living and thinking, like Dr. Mishra mentioned, achar, ahar, vihar, and so many things. So I think it's a very important thing that you have brought up, Darshan. I think we'll definitely take up in the discussion that we have left with, I think, 25 minutes. I will now finally invite the star of the today's webinar, our honorable chairman of the American Academy, whose brainchild is this, not only this webinar, but the entire YogaCon 21 and the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation itself. Dr. Indraneel Basure, please. You are mute. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Nirmal Gupta, for giving me a scope to talk in this rather very, very eminent set of people. I do consider both Professor Reddy and Professor Mishra not only to be very, very eminent colleagues, but also like my mentors. These people have been the bulwark supporting India's health system, a system where I did my everything, starting from medical school to medicine to cardiology before I came over to this country. So I'm really thankful to these people for setting up an excellent system in India, to both Professor Reddy and Professor Mishra. I also will miss doing what is right if I don't talk about Darshan. Darshan is a young maverick. He's been spreading the fire of yoga, complementary medicine all over US. So thanks for his vision, his ideas that he brought up. Now, so one quick thing that I want to bring up, and that's very important for, I think, us to understand, is that yoga in the last 20 years has moved from what was predominantly taught as, I'm not saying it is or it was predominantly thought as a Hindu religious system, to something that is now known to be completely scientific, is certainly spiritual, and has really nothing to do with religion per se. And these rather radical transformation, unfortunately, has not percolated into the academic committee or academic system of the medical system, neither in America, obviously, where it is comparatively new, even in India, where it existed for 10,000 years. So even in India, a lot of people who are trained, born, brought up in India think, oh, yoga, this must be something to do with praying, going to the temple, which unfortunately it is not. In all the 109 aphorisms of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, he doesn't even talk about any God. He doesn't talk about any prayer at all. It's a manual of how you get yourself better. So it's possibly the world's first self-help book, which, as you know, sells like hotcakes nowadays. So he neither talks about God. You don't have to believe in any god, goddesses, or any particular religion, and then you still can be a very powerful yogi and be successful in your life. Now let's move to the medical aspect of it. So medical aspect is extremely important because I, for example, had a patient whose daughter was telling me that her father, who's a veteran, used to do yoga, but he stopped doing it after he was diagnosed with cardiac failure. And his ejection fraction went down. So he asked me, can he continue his yoga? And the tragic part is that she had asked the same question to his father's cardiologist and also his primary care, and they couldn't give them an answer. Just a word of understanding here. Though I'm a cardiologist, I predominantly don't practice general cardiology anymore. So most of my patients are cardiac electrophysiology patient. This is a gentleman who had ventricular tachycardia, so was referred to me by his cardiologist. That's why the question of her talking to his cardiologist also comes up. So he has a cardiologist who referred to me, and I'm a cardiologist plus a cardiac electrophysiologist, and I was seeing him on the electrophysiology angle. So I asked him what are the yogas that he does. So he told me, she told me what are the yogas that he does, the cobra posture, this posture. And I explained to her that yes, these are all the postures that he cannot do. And B, C, D he can do, E, F he cannot do now. Once we put him on medication, goal direct medical therapy, he can do, he can start doing those also. So it's very important for a doctor today practicing anywhere in the world to understand what yoga is. Not only what yoga is, what does posture mean? What does this posture entail? It's important to understand in the last 2 decades, we have understood the medicine behind yoga. We have understood how the brain transforms itself, how the neuronal setup in the brain changes, how you can set up a new set of neuron firing inside your brain that will prevent you to have depression, that will prevent you to have anxiety, that will prevent you to have stress. And that's very important because, as Dr. Mishra pointed out, cardiovascular disease remains the largest killer in the world. And it kills twice the number of people than the second largest killer, which is cancer. And almost all the cardiovascular disease stems from vascular inflammation. And one of the most prime cause of vascular inflammation is stress. When you have stress that persists for a long time, called toxic stress, you develop a bunch of chemicals. And the same chemicals are developed in every disease which is harmful. For example, in COVID, you have interleukin 6 increased more than 100 times. In heart disease also, you have interleukin 6 increased. You have CRP increased. All the inflammatory markers are increased. And when you do yoga in the right sense, yoga does not mean posture. Again, I'd go back to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, out of the 109 aphorism, only 3 aphorism actually deals with physical yoga. So what does that mean? Physical yoga or asanas or postures is just 3 to 5% of yoga. 95% is meditation. And we see that in cardiology all the time. If you want to bring down one more medication that you use among the 3 or 4 medications for hypertension, if you want to have a better control of your diabetes mellitus, if you want to decrease inflammation in your brain, in your heart, in your peripheral vascular, for example, in your legs, then you have to practice meditation. Yoga, physical yoga is good, but just not enough. You have to bring down the inflammatory markers. So a doctor today must understand the biological basis of yoga. He should understand that in schizophrenia, there is lack of societal commitment. People tend to stay by themselves. They don't want to mix with the community. And it has been shown by yoga that there is increased release of oxytocin inside the brain of schizophrenics. No drug known to mankind today can increase oxytocin inside the brain. So basically, you're making a schizophrenic person do what he or she lacks the most. So it is important to understand this. A physician will never be able to understand it until he understands the basic mechanics of yoga, how it works in the brain. What does functional MRI shows? How does PET scanning shows? What does PET scanning show? How the brain grows. 30 to 35% of adults in this country and most of the Western world languish in the nursing home with dementia. They have no clue what their name is. They have no clue who their son is, who their daughter is, who their wife is, where do they stay, where they are presently, whether they're presently lodged in their home or in a nursing home or in a dungeon. They don't know. They have no clue. And there is almost no medication. The 3 medication we have is as good as placebo. And the 4th medication, which FDA has just approved, has got such a weak support for it that at least 3 members of the FDA committee resigned because FDA approved that drug, because they said there isn't enough scientific proof to approve this drug. And the drug is extremely costly also. And here we have meditations. Sarah Laser from Mass General showed way back, almost 10 years back, that if you practice for 10 years, your cerebral cortex can grow as much as 1 inch. And after that, there's been more than 85 studies which shows different parts of the brain, including the cerebral cortex, including your temporal lobe, area 41, 42, where your memory is stored, where your immediate memory, where your intermediate memory, protein formation is increased. So we have tons of proof of a system which actually cures or tries to cure a disease that is not cured by anything in medicine. We have Herceptin for cancer. It is over $100,000. It only works in few cases. But there have been tons of studies that show the natural killer cell function in cancer patients is increased more than 150 times by practice of meditation. Just a 12-week course of meditation has done it. So when we know these, this has to be brought in. So we have to come to the new paradigm of yoga. Yoga is 100% science. It has nothing to do with religion. And whatever little science we don't know, we'll know in the coming future, because science itself is restricted. We do not know everything. So it is important to understand and let the world, as well as the medical communities, the American Heart Organization, American Medical Organization, the Indian Medical Association, understand the science behind yoga, so they stop treating yoga as a bunch of another nonsense by some religious and ritual person with no scientific basis. Most of the things that yoga shows, or the benefits that yoga does, has been scientifically shown. And the tragedy is, I'd call it a tragedy, I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, maybe I should be more politically correct, that most of this research has been done by people not from India. They have never been to India. They are not Hindus, or they don't belong to any particular religion. Neither they have any sense of what that religion means. So they have been done by physician scientists, so they could be the most biased research ever known to, most non-biased research ever known to mankind. So I'd like to stop with that and bring this to the fore, that it is important because every primary medical student should know the science, should know that it is a scientific way to reduce all the problems that we have presently. It plays a big role in the economics also. We are getting to understand in the next 20-22 years, American Medicare system will break down. America can't pay people for their treatment as it is doing now, or elderly people who are more than 65 years old, because the finance is getting drained due to the pandemic with heart disease. But if you ask somebody to sit at home and do yoga, he doesn't have to pay to a doctor. He doesn't have to pay to the $55,000, which the new FDA medicine is supposed to cost. That doesn't even work. And that which made 3 members of the FDA resign in protest because FDA approved that drug. We don't have to deal up with all this nonsense. And as you know, there was a time when hydrochloroquine was purported to be the miracle drug to cure COVID, and then it fell apart. So we don't have to deal with all these things, because yoga is something that has been there for 10,000 years, and there have been tons of research, and you don't need to have an FDA panel to decide if that's true or false, because those research have come from Germany, from England, from Finland, from every color, from every race, from every language, from every religion. So it's time to bring in this medicine, bring education. And my suggestion is, the first step to educate is the newer generations. Like, that's what Darshan is doing. A lot of you may not know, he's the one who drafted what should be the curriculum, how we can use yoga for when the dean requested us to draft how yoga and other complementary medicine can be incorporated into the in the Harvard Medical School curriculum. So it's very important that we hit it where it begins. We hit it at the roots. And once we do that, the next step would be, and which we are trying to do, we're trying to connect with ACC to see how we can push scientifically yoga into these big groups. And I'll take the help of Dr. Mishra for dealing with the surgical side of medicine in America. And of course, Dr. Reddy. Dr. Reddy is one of the world's most famous epidemiologists. So we need help from all of you to see how we can get it first to the medical students, and second to the different medical organizations, and through them to the common people. Thank you very much for having me. I hope I was within my time. Thanks for the patience.
Yes. Thank you very much. We are now left with 9 minutes. I think 9 minutes program first. Anyway, we'll have few questions. I think rather than having a lot of discussion, we will have questions which have come from the viewers, listeners. The first one is MBBS doctor who has written that I am an MBBS doctor and I have struggled a lot doing MD in yoga therapy. Still, there is no central body to recognize postgraduate medical degree in yoga therapy in India. Please comment. So I would like perhaps any one of you to take up this question, Professor Mishra or Professor Reddy, because it pertains to India.
Yeah, I think there are these courses, and most yoga teachers, they come from these schools, yoga schools. One of them in Delhi, and I think what he is asking whether it is recognized by the allopathic system, so we call the National Medical Commission, present day, past medical council, or various state medical council. So I think he should not look for any recognition there. If he has done this degree, it will come handy for him in his practice, and also he can preach and practice both. So he should not worry about that this degree needs to be recognized by, because it has to be recognized by who has awarded this degree, and I'm sure that must be the case. So like S. Vyasa, this university in Bangalore, which is led by Professor Nagendra, and also this one school is in Delhi of yoga school. I don't know where he has obtained that.
Morarji Desai.
Morarji, so that's a
Morarji
recognized
Desai
thing.
Institute, yeah. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so why is he looking for further recognition by whom?
So,
I think I will.
a point.
Thank you very much, Professor Mishra. Thank you very much.
I think
I
can just add one thing to that. I think what Dr. Mishra said makes excellent point, that there is no reason for other people to recognize. Because see, MDNIY is a national institute, number one. Number two, I am told that there is an effort to make it a deemed university in the future. So that will again improve its aid. And as Dr. Mishra said, that during my time, I had to go outside my state to do my DM, because my DM from West Bengal, given by West Bengal state, was not recognized by the rest of India. So now I have a DM, I can practice anywhere in India as a cardiologist. I couldn't had I done DM in India, in West Bengal. So that's there all the time. Some of the DMs may not be recognized by MCI. At that time we had MCI, now it is changed. And people had to go to Central Institute if you are competitive enough to do those. So that's always true. So I completely agree with Dr. Mishra, which if somebody recognizes, somebody does not recognize, that does not stem your capacity to use it in your own practice and your own life, and to propagate it to your patients, which is the most important thing a doctor can do.
Thank you very much, Professor Mishra and Professor Dr. Ray. I think the issue is not just of recognition on a piece of paper. The regulatory framework in India is so complex, and I'm sure Darshan was talking to me yesterday. The regulatory framework for these new graduates and future doctors who are going to look after us for the next 30, 40, maybe 50 years, they suffer with this apprehension of recognition of their competence and skills. That is the issue. In 2016, our Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji, I think, asked the UGC to set up an inter-university center for yoga and meditation. Dr. H.R. Nagendra, the Chancellor of S. Vyasa, was the man who proposed the idea. He accepted it. Until today, now it is almost 5 years, that nothing has proceeded in that front. I think that our governments, policymakers, have to be very, very sensitive about the policies that they frame, because a lack of those actions in the policy on the ground creates a lot of apprehension. What do you say, Darshan? Is that true or not? It is true for every society, every nation. So I think, yeah, please, Darshan.
No, I was just saying, I think you articulated very beautifully, and that's not unique to India. I think that's in any place. That if you create a mandate and the mandate is not filled, it just creates more. This is just for the purposes of showmanship,
Yes.
and it doesn't have. There's no muscle behind the. So I think here, what we have tried to do is not to do big chunks at all in big things. I think having obviously central bodies and regulatory frameworks are important, but I do also feel that our positionality, particularly as physicians, in itself carries a tremendous pedestal. So now that I can speak, if I am competent in my regulated field, and I can do the regular things, that for me to introduce. So, for example, just to give, I was just recently on inpatient medicine service, teaching service residents, and we have some of the most brilliant residents from the world come to our institution, and it's a case of just we think a routine atrial fibrillation case. But we could show that when I was with the patient and I just engaged in a brief breathing approach in the inpatient side, that the heart rate went to a heart rate of 110 and it went down to a heart rate of about 90. Now, for the residents to just witness that made them just start thinking like, okay. So it doesn't mean I don't still do my medications and all that, but there was something here that we can actually capitalize. So I think using our current positionality to extend curiosity, and again, the students and the trainees are going to be the most important advocates here, and it has to come from bottom up approach.
Thank you very much, Darshan. Thank you very much for your input. There is another question which I think Professor Reddy, I think I would like to put that question for him because he deals with a lot of public health issues. And regulatory framework, I would like to add just one sentence, that the current scenario of public demand and public expectations from the treatment and the legal aspect of it for tomorrow and many years from today are going to be very tough for the practicing physicians in whatever domain they are going to work. We have reached a stage where we are perhaps so respected in our own fields that people don't question our decision making and the outcomes that we provide them. But the young doctors and the physicians are definitely very anxious about this. So, Professor Reddy, I think you were raising your hand on that issue also. But before that, I would like to put yourself a question which has come from a viewer, that should yoga be taught as part of ethics and values in medical education? I think we have touched upon this issue in general, but if you would like to respond to this question along with your other response. Thank you, sir.
Well, certainly the value system of medicine can be greatly enhanced and enriched by bringing yoga into the discussion on ethics and interpersonal interactions that involve the doctor-patient relationship or the relationship with the community in public health. And I think there certainly yoga can be brought in because, as has been repeatedly emphasized, it has a much more holistic spectrum and then well beyond asanas. So certainly the value system of yoga can be brought in. I think it's an important element that can be brought in. But coming back to the question of opportunities and barriers related to what one wants to do by way of bringing yoga into conjunction with the practice of allopathic medicine and the regulatory barriers that exist, I believe one of the ways that we should try and attempt to break down the barriers is not merely by stressing the advocated virtue, but by the demonstrated value, which means that we ought to bring it in not only into the systems of complementary management of medical conditions and demonstrate the value, but build reasonably well constructed research projects around it. If we can get our research agencies, even before some of the rigid regulatory structures of education start yielding, if we can get research projects to be funded, which can actually do conjoint research on the value of yoga, for example, whether it's hypertension or post-traumatic stress disorder or wherever, we can actually demonstrate the value so that we build a demand for it. We build a demand for it in the medical system, in the allopathic system, among the public. and the policymakers will respond to that demand. So I think we should actually try and push for research which involves this kind of a conjunction. Secondly, we must also utilize whatever opportunities are provided even in clinical care now. Like, for example, I know that there are some private hospitals in the National Capital Region of Delhi who actually have been having Ayurveda and yoga as complementary systems of medicine and find it as a very useful adjunct for their allopathic treatment, for the recovery of post-surgical patients, of alleviation of post-surgical pain, and so on and so forth. And they've been talking about it. And they find it useful even commercially for enhancing the value of their hospitals. So find an opportunity, whoever is willing. Why not talk to the paramilitary forces? And if not the army itself, if there is a post-traumatic disorder, how do we actually bring that into application there? So there will be many doors that may open up if we actually start talking about the immediate value that it can be imparted, rather than raise it merely as a principle of formal recognition.
Agree. Very nicely put. Very nicely put, Professor Reddy. I think the approach should be bottoms up and top down, and where somewhere in the middle we meet up the expectation of the society and meet up the expectation of the policymakers who look forward many years ahead of us. So it is a beautiful thing that we have had a very good discussion and we had answered few questions. I would like to propose that in the light of scientific studies that has been published in the peer-reviewed journals, which has given a level A evidence on the science of yoga, including meditation, that is ideal for physical, mental, moral, spiritual, and social development. Should this webinar be ending here, or should we take it further ahead? I think the kind of expertise, the kind of people, the eminent panelists that we are sitting together, I think the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation should pose, I think, a draft resolution, should pass a draft resolution and publish it and submit it to the highest channels of the Government of India, including the UGC, Health Education Ministry, and possibly to the Honorable Prime Minister of India, reminding him that what he proposed has not been carried out, number one. What are the benefits that the American Academy and the eminent panelists think about the education in general, including the yoga and meditation, which has been very beautifully dissociated by the chairman Indranil Basure from religion, because it's a scientific domain. It is purely scientific and nothing but science. Though the science has been, now we establish that it is more than 8,000 years old, documented through the carbon dating systems. So I propose on my all panelists that we draft a resolution. I am volunteering myself to start with creating a skeleton document, and then I circulate it for all your inputs, and then we finally make maybe a 4 or 5 page very sharp and pointed document and submit it to the Government of India. I am sure, like our Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji moved the world around to celebrate the Yoga Day, International Yoga Day, 21st June, this document may initiate may initiate the world over to accept the yoga and meditation in their curriculum in whichever field that they are thinking of including it. So if I will now invite all the panelists in the same order for 1 or 2 minutes, they give their closing parting message to the viewers and as a final message to the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. Thank you, sir. Dr. Srinath Reddy, and after that I will conclude in 1 or 2 minutes.
I welcome your proposal, and I think it's a very good initiative. I would only suggest that we expand the network of people who are going to be contribute their ideas as well as their endorsements to a larger group of people, both from the formal medical community as well as the people who are actually applying yoga in a very meaningful way for addressing a number of health conditions, both from point of view of health promotion and disease prevention to clinical management and rehabilitation, the entire spectrum of healthcare in the broadest dimension. So there are many institutions and experts who we can actually bring in, and that will also make sure that we are not seen as a medically cloistered community, that we are actually embracing the philosophy of what we preach by actually forming a very joint front. Thank you.
Right, sir. Thank you. Professor Mishra?
Yeah, I think that what you said, we'll do that. And at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, we already established a Center for Integrative Medicine in 2016. And that is running very well. It is integrating with the modern system of medicine, with science of yoga and Ayurveda. The number of specialties and departments are collaborating, doing a lot of work in this direction, from Department of Cardiology, Neurology, Respiratory Medicine, surgical disciplines. So I think the scope is very wide and open. It is up to us to use its potential to our advantage in the overall well-being of our patients who come with various disease processes which we treat. And allopathy cannot take care of every symptom, every disease, every aspect of these illnesses. That is where allopathy has a dead end, and the role of our yoga science and Ayurveda can be used for benefit of these patients. It's a this is what my take is, that there are huge strengths in our ancient science of yoga and meditation as well as Ayurveda, as well as there is a huge strength in allopathic system. And when we talk of the precision medicine, when we talk of surgical disciplines all across, whether it's organ transplant, whether it's any other type of surgery, acute medicine, they have a huge role to play where not all disciplines can bring in. So there is I don't see any conflict of interest in each other. It's a complementary thing, and it's potential. And the world has realized that. If you see the yoga in its natural form is being practiced all across the globe in every country, and you will see on 21st June again the same thing. But now what we are talking about, one aspect of yoga is to keep your body healthy. The other is when you have some problem, disease process in the body, as Dr. Indranil was mentioning, what one should do to overcome those problems. And that is where the role of more than yoga, it is the asanas, it is the meditation, which brings in the pranayams, what beauty it brings in, and the oxygenation, removing your what we say, the free radicals or whatever we call it, or generating endorphins, which will give you a very sense of well-being, and which is so essential for our well-being anyway, to generate our immune system, to stimulate our immune system to fight the disorder. So the scope is very wide and open. It is up to us to use its potential, how much we can use. But yes, our focus is on including, is objectively in the medical curriculum, how much, over how many years, what type of assessment, summative, formative, we all have to define that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mishra. Thank you very much. I think I think you have very beautifully summed up your parting message. I think now it's the turn of Dr. Darshan Mehta, please. Your closing statement, please.
No, I don't think I will just. I don't have much to add except that I think we need more action, and I think at this point less talk and more action, and look forward to participating in that with all of you.
Thank you. I agree with you. I totally agree with you, Dr. Basure.
Yeah, Dr. Professor Gupta, I think your suggestion is excellent, and we can post this. Let's create a white paper, and as Dr. Reddy said, get more people. And as Dr. Mishra said, we can get Dr. Gautam and other people at the M Center also to be one of those who can read the write-up once you do it. And get Dr. Nagendra and then create a white paper, and then we can make sure that it is not only gets, we'll make sure that it not only gets published, but also send it to the appropriate authority, not only in India, but also make appropriate changes as required by me and Darshan here in the US. And we can try to push it to the different organizations and people and medical groups in US also. Understating the importance. I think that's a brilliant idea that you had, Dr. Gupta. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Now, before I conclude this session, I think we have all agreed that by the discipline Yoga Sadhana, not only our medical practicing healthcare workers and medical teachers can develop a serene and pleasant personality overall in an integrated and holistic manner. Researchers have also shown that yogic techniques and produce consistent and beneficial psychophysiological changes. I think it's time that we put everything in practice and in action, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we will commence upon the action program outcome of this webinar so that we reach somewhere. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Professor Reddy, Professor Mishra, Dr. Darshan Mehta ji, and Dr. Indranil Basure ji. I hand over the further proceedings to dear Shruti Kreiskar ji, who will now conclude this session. Thank you.
Guptaji. Thank you, eminent speakers, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Mishra ji, Dr. Basure, Dr. Mehta. It was such a powerful, interesting discussion. And I really believe that this might be the end of the webinar, but this could be the first step towards the right direction in putting these things into action. And it was such an honor, such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I thank you, Dr. Nirmal Gupta, for such an amazing moderator for this session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our viewers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care. Keep safe. Keep healthy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I also thank all our viewers for joining us today. Stay tuned for our next session, Mechanistic View of Yoga in Terms of ANS and Genetics. I also thank my tech team, Anjali ji, Chaitanya ji, Janeth here, everyone working hard behind this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Stay tuned to the YouTube and Facebook channel. Thank you. Namaste.